Hello, and welcome to the Catching the Octopus podcast. Here, we will explore how connecting inward gives us an advantage outward. We openly talk about the obstacles and challenges and difficulties that life throws our way and how they become moments of gratitude and things that can benefit us when we look back on our lives. I'm your host, Naomi Hurley, and it is my mission to bring you top quality guests that will share with you openly their obstacles and also the techniques they use to go inward that strengthens the way that they serve themselves and others at the highest level. Thank you for joining. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. We're doing a recap episode today and we're recapping the interview with Saurabh Jain. He is a seasoned leader in technology and healthcare and is currently serving as the CEO of Opal. Now, Opal is a publicly listed company at the forefront of AI-assisted technologies for the healthcare sector. So we had a really great talk about how AI is stepping up in this space and how it's making some improvements. And we also touched on his leadership, being a CEO, and how that differs from some of the other leadership elements at different levels within the business. So he also mentioned he serves on boards. So serving on boards gives him another level of business understanding because it's, overseeing everything. But, there's levels of competence increasing, in people when they're serving multiple organizations because they need to be across a lot of different things. And so, not that he said this, but I can see that stepping into that space is a real growth mindset element. It's really about creating improvements in our own styles and in our own ways that we approach things. Plus, there'd be a ton of learnings that would come from that. I've served in boards, not for a lot of organizations as a non-for-profit and some school boards. And that has done that for me. It's given me a lot of growth and a better understanding about how things operate purely because of the different decision-making processes and the information that's shared in those spaces. So he also talked about sometimes CEOs becoming a bit stuck. So if they stay in one organization for multiple years, that can make them a bit stuck. So by having that openness to sit on boards and be in different spaces, they're always, keeping their skills honed, for lack of a better way of saying it. So we did talk about the AI, and the AI that, Saurabh is involved in is a system or a platform that can predict if clinical trials are viable. So it saves a lot of time and resources required for testing, and that testing that's not successful. So currently, most of the testing that happens in that clinical trial space is just driven by gut instincts, which is not bad. That tends to work in a lot of spaces, but this gives a more scientific approach to deciding whether to go ahead with the trials. And as you can imagine, that has a whole range of benefits around investing and also, different variables that are going to be used within the trials. It also reduces, it will also reduce a lot of the human clinical trials because they can put them through the simulator and come up with the ones that are more likely to work, which will then be passed on to the human trial space. So it's got a whole range of benefits. And I think that's the whole concept of AI in our world today, right? It's there to help improve things and help improve decision-making bases. But, one thing we didn't talk about in the interview, but I'd like to raise now is, I did a presentation for a speaking competition last week, and I did it around gender bias. And my belief around that is gender bias is not a man problem, it's a people problem, right? So as a community, we all have gender bias. And so if we want to combat that on the implicit level, which is the subconscious level, then we need to approach it as a people thing, not just, man bashing, for lack of a better way of saying it. And when I did my research on putting that together, I actually found that there was studies that show that AI has a gender bias because of the way that it's programmed. So when we're looking at AI, it's an amazing tool, but we also have to be aware that how we program it, what we put in is what we're going to get out. And so we need to have that awareness. Now, I very much doubt that this is the case with the programs that are being used by Opal. They spent a lot of time and money in putting this together, and resources. But I just wanted to touch a little bit on how AI in other areas can help us as well. So it can be used in recruiting. In that space, we need to be aware of gender bias, right? I use it for my study. So I'm doing a master's at the moment. And when I do my assignments, I actually ask AI to give me the top 10 research articles in this particular area or on this particular topic. So when I was doing my psychology degree, we didn't have AI. And so I used to spend days trolling through research articles to find the right ones to be able to use for my assignment. So, if an assignment was going to take me 4 or 5 days to put together, I'd add another 3 days on that for research. So it really does streamline the way that I do it. Now, it doesn't replace me actually doing the work, but it's a tool to help me to do the work. And I think that's the case in this space as well. It doesn't replace the trials, but it's a tool that can help refine the trials so that they can get the best outcomes. I know a lot of people are worried about what it's going to do for us in the long term. But, Saurabh and I spoke about, being here many years ago when the Industrial Revolution came through and when people were worried about factories and robots and how they would replace jobs. And he said, instead of having 2 shirts, now we might have 10 shirts. So our consumerism increased, which meant that there was still people that needed to operate the machines and fix the machines and work in that space. So it's about adjusting and adapting. And, we also spoke about COVID being a great example. It was those businesses that adapted during COVID that were the ones that actually were able to survive that time period of where everything changed. Especially for restaurants and service providers, you weren't able to actually go in and dine in there and be in social groups. So there had to be, and even with beauticians, wasn't able to visit my beautician or hairdresser or things like that. So there was ways that we had to adapt. And the businesses that did adapt and pivot and do what they needed to do were the ones that were able to get through it. Now, some of them were able to capitalize and make more profits than what they did pre-COVID times. Some of them just kept their head afloat, but it was the ones that weren't able to do things differently or weren't able to see a different way to present their services or products that ended up probably suffering the most. Now, that's terrible. I'm not endorsing, I'm not saying that it was fair or anything like that. Just using it as an example of if we're coming into a period where AI is becoming more prevalent, how are we going to adapt to that? How are we going to use, this tool to be able to be beneficial to us rather than it come in and take our job or make us redundant in some particular way, shape, or form? So, Sarah was talking about, this AI in this clinical trial space makes it easier to raise capital as the good guys that are doing the right thing and getting the trials through, they're going to get more money to do more good stuff, right? And it can create and diversify some of these investors as well and becomes a safer investment. So it's less risky for people. So they're probably more inclined to do it. And instead of investing on a guess or a hunch or a gut feel, there's actually some, basis behind their investment. So it makes it a better investment decision and possibly better outcomes for them. So with the way that Saurabh approaches his leadership space, we talked a little bit there about, the CEOs and how they look at leadership. And I mentioned, that in that role, there'd be a lot of strategy. And he kind of corrected me a little and said, yeah, there is strategy and CEOs love strategy, but that's not the main component of the leadership, in his opinion. So he said, maybe there needs to be a couple of hours spent on strategy in a week, but for him, it's the execution, right? It's funny at how he can imprint the vision into the rest of the organization. And that's where his leadership really comes to the forefront in his role as CEO. He also spoke about, putting that into that space and looking at how he's going to get the vision to the rest of the organization. But in addition to that, how is he going to make sure what the company is doing and the success that they're feeling actually succeeds him as a person? Right. So when he moves on from CEO and they get a new CEO in, how are they going to keep that consistency and that moving forward momentum rather than people just going, oh, cool, he's gone. I can just go back to the way I did it before. And as a CEO for him, that's one of his main objectives in that role. He also spoke about sitting on boards and asking good questions, right? So when he's on the boards, the questions that he does ask, though, are more around why hasn't this happened, or give me some information on what's gone on there, etc. But sitting in a CEO role gives a different perspective, right? And he likes the best of both worlds, I suppose you could say, because he likes to also be in the trenches and experience the issues. Because when you're sitting on a governance space, it's easy to say, well, why is there a reduction in revenue and why isn't that working? But when you're in amongst it, you can actually feel why it's not working and you can experience those issues. So it gives different perspectives when you're evaluating and when you're coming up with those strategy. A common theme through most of the podcast is all about learning within leadership and that everyone is still learning. So it doesn't matter if you're the CEO of a multi-million or billion-dollar company or you're the CEO of a startup. We're all learning within leadership. And there's no one quick fix or a magic pill we can take that creates the leader within us, right? The body of knowledge around us moves so quickly, and what we learned years ago in leadership is really no longer relevant, and that goes for technology and a whole range of other things. And so we need to keep evolving and we need to keep learning. And when I did my first HR degree, it took me 11 years to do that degree. So, it's not how long it takes, it's getting there in the end. And I know I had to actually apply because after 10 years, the university actually drops off the relevance of the study. So for me, I had to actually put in an application to the university so that those first units I did at the start of my degree wouldn't drop off, because I would have never completed it, right? Every time I would have done more, gone, thought I'd finished, there'd be units that would have dropped off from the 10-year previous and I'd have to redo them. So I had to justify where my knowledge was, that I was continually learning, that I was keeping updated, et cetera, et cetera. So even our major learning institutions recognize that over time, what we learn, like that body of knowledge surrounding that, is always moving and it's always shifting. And so we need to be shifting and moving with that as leaders. And I talked about in the recap from last week from David Watson that learning and growing and in that sort of space as leaders is more about improving what we've got. It doesn't mean that we're missing something majority of the time. It's just an improvement process. And I think that's a reframe that people need to have, because I think especially going back years and years ago, training was to fill a gap, whereas now it's to continually stay updated and continually improve. Saurabh also talked about leadership being about adapting and being open-minded, and that those two things establish really strong leadership in people, and that's what's needed when we're in any level of leadership role within an organization.
If you're enjoying this podcast and you want Naomi or any of her guests featured on your podcast or as a keynote speaker at your next event, you'll find their contact details included in the show notes. If you'd like to learn more about how you can work with Naomi individually or as part of your strategy to improve leadership in your business, then review the courses, offers and services at getupandgoconsulting.com.au.
One of the interesting things we also spoke about was recruitment and CEO recruitment. And, we're talking about adapting and being open-minded and how we can, make mistakes and come back from those, and how we adapt and how we consult and all those sorts of things that makes a good CEO. But during the recruitment process, that can sometimes be hard to see in candidates. And this isn't just for CEO recruitment. This is for any leadership recruitment. And I love the way he said this, because because as you may know, I've got a HR background and I've done a lot of recruitment in my time. In fact, being a part of the local primary school and high school boards, I had to assist with the recruitment process for a primary school principal last year and a high school principal this year. So I've even recently gone through this process. And when someone applies for a role, they come into the interview and they come into that space with confidence, right? And they really think about what's the right answer these people need to hear, and they're adjusting how they're sharing things, so they're sharing them in the best possible light and the best possible way. And Sarah was saying that the people that do that, that come into him in his interviews and they think they're right before they talk, they don't usually do well long term. Like they might do well in the early stages, but they tend to be less open to learning from others, right? And that holds them back. And so we won't go into an interview and go, oh, yes, I failed at something and I learnt, or this is how I self-reflect. Those sorts of things we don't think about sharing because we're trying to put our best foot forward and we're trying to showcase how awesome we are at something. So, it's hard to find in interview processes that ability to fail and that growth mindset showcased and the ability to self-reflect, because an interviewee wants to showcase perfection and that's what we go about. So a really good interviewer, when we're looking at interviewing some of these for these leadership roles, is actually going into that space and asking those right questions, getting those behavioral based questions right. So we're asking the ones that give them an opportunity to show us when they scraped their knee and how they got up and made and rectified that. We went back to talking a little bit of AI after we spoke leadership, and we're talking about some of that apprehension from AI. And I mentioned, about the Industrial Revolution. We spoke about that. But one of the things that came from our conversation was, one of the reasons that some people have apprehension towards AI is due to a lack of understanding of that application. And there's what we don't know and what we don't understand. What's unfamiliar to us is what we usually fear. So it doesn't come from a place of knowledge. It's more of not knowing what's going to happen, which can create that apprehension or create that fear. And the mind is set up to like what's familiar. So if we go back to our primitive days and look, although our mind has evolved and our body has evolved, it really still is very primitive. And if you go back and have a look at the interview I did with David Watson around that neuroscience leadership, it's a very reactive piece of kit, right, that we've got in our heads. So although the brain is super clever, it can be really super dumb too. So what it wants to do is it wants to find things familiar, because when we're in those hunter-gatherer days, things that were familiar were not a threat. They were safe. But anything we came across that wasn't familiar, we had to instantly fear it because it could be a jeopardy. It could jeopardize our safety, right? It could attack us. It could be a plant that could be poisonous, that could kill us or make us sick. Weather patterns, if they weren't familiar, then they were to be feared. So anything that wasn't familiar, wasn't recognized, we're designed to be apprehensive towards it. So just because people are apprehensive towards AI doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. In fact, that's what their brain is designed to do. It's designed to create that for them. But the best way to overcome that, whether it's with AI, whether it's with a new role that you have, whether it's with different leadership styles and techniques you're being introduced to, is to make it familiar, right? Understand it more, learn more about it. This even was relevant for myself. I don't like snakes too much. I won't say I have a fear of snakes because I've been working on that. But when I moved out to a property, I was living on 100 acres at one point and there was a fair few snakes there. And I'm like, I want to overcome this fear of snakes. And the best way to do that is to create more understanding. So I went and did a course with, I think it was Fauna, which was a snake awareness course, and actually handled a snake. Excuse me, wasn't a venomous snake, but I actually handled one We fed one, we had a look, we understood them, we talked about the different patterns on how to distinguish whether they were a venomous snake or whether they were a non-venomous snake, and a whole range of other things. We learned about their behaviors, how they acted, why they did the things that they did. And just understanding that more and having more awareness around that, it took away the fear purely because it was no longer unfamiliar to me. It was something that was more familiar. Now, I'm not saying go and find a snake in the wild and pick it up. And no, 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 no. But I am saying, this is the same with leadership. People so many times are put into roles of leadership because they either want a pay rise and that's the next level to go at, or the company needs a leader and sees them with really good technical skills and thinks, oh, they'll be a great leader. And they're put into these roles with limited training and limited support. Now, no fault of their own, no fault of the company, because you don't know what you don't know. But a lot of the things they need to do, a lot of the ways they need to show up can be unfamiliar to them. And so instead of embracing that space and going, I want to learn more, I want to do training on this, I want to embrace this. I mean, there's some that do, let's be honest, but there's many that actually think, oh, I can't ask for training, or I can't go into that space because that will show I don't know what I'm doing. And there's fear around that because it's not familiar to them. So the more training we do, the more PD we do, the more that becomes familiar and the more open-minded that we can become. So we also spoke about a few other things as well. Just looking through some notes here, making sure I'm not going to miss anything. We talked a little bit about the subconscious, and we talked about things getting buried deep in the subconscious. So when we were talking about, fearing things, not only did we mention about, making things familiar so we're not apprehensive towards them, but also mention things we're taught to fear. Right. So we're taught to fear so many things in our lives. And I think the example Saurabh used was, with his children, and his wife was teaching him animals. And when she said spider, she screwed up her face. And he was like, oh, interesting. Is that then portraying to the child, oh, this is something to be scared about, right? Instead of just saying the word. So socially, we are conditioned to fear things and be fearful of things. And some of this stuff gets buried really deep in the subconscious, and it can end up sticking. And so if we've had parents or caregivers or people, adults around us when we're younger that have dissed something in particular, maybe it is training. Maybe I know that some of my family, I know my cousin's space, believed that, that tertiary education was just a bookworm and there wasn't any practical application. So didn't value that. And I wonder if I had been raised by parents or caregivers that didn't value tertiary education, like, would I have continued on with that? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But this stuff gets buried deep in the subconscious, right? And it can end up sticking. Then we went into a really interesting space in the conversation, which really relates to me. So, for those of you who know, I am a big fan of understanding energy and how energy works and really going within to connect. And I mean, the 3 questions that I ask in each of the podcast episodes is about how people go within, how they find gratitude, what do they do to self-reflect. And I feel like these are really important spaces to be able to get, that internal messaging that comes from us, rather than just listening to all of the noise and advice from what's around us. And Saurabh has quite an extensive meditation practice. It trumps mine. I thought mine was pretty good. But one of the things that he's gotten from that is he says that great things don't happen when we're busy. And when we're sitting in a role as CEO or in a lot of leadership roles, and especially leadership/management roles, they can be really overwhelming. And there's so many people that get to a point where they experience burnout because they're always busy. And it's hard for them to switch off. And in that corporate space, we can get caught in the busy trap, even if we're not in a leadership role. excuse me, even if we're just in support roles, we can get caught in that busy trap of always having to be doing something, always having to be working towards something. But it's the free time that we have every day that allows us to think more deeply. It allows us to reflect on things. It allows us to connect with self and really think deeply about different things. And that's when we can also have the opportunity to move into a space of creativity. Now, Sarah mentioned, that's why when we're in the shower, all the ideas come in because we're not busy. We're stopping and we're letting our inner voice, or we're letting our voice come through, because when there's noise all around us, we don't get the opportunity to hear what needs to be said by our own internal space. And so taking the time for silence allows those good ideas to flow through. And the good ideas are always there, right? They're always there. But when we're busy, all the noise drowns them out. And when that noise is in the background, the mind tends to talk to us less, tends to not give us the guidance or that brilliant idea or that thing to contemplate. So a good way of creating silence is through meditation, and that's what Saurabh talked about. And for him, meditation is gaining control over the mind and then creating an ability to better manage the emotions, and that changes us into a different person. So I normally say meditation is about controlling your emotions and your thoughts, which create better behaviors. But I liked how Saurabh actually said, no, 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 creates a better person, a different person. You show up differently. And we compared stories on some of our meditative sessions, and not every session is perfect, right? But it's called a meditation practice for a reason. And there's a lot of people I speak to in the corporate space that will openly say that, oh, meditating isn't for them. They don't get their mind to quieten down. They can't actually get anything from meditation. And I remember I used to say the same thing many years ago. And someone actually said to me, if you can't meditate, then you should be meditating. And that really stuck to me. And I was like, yeah, right. And it's kind of like, if someone can't walk from their couch to their fridge, or fridge probably wasn't a good idea, or their couch to the front door because they've got issues with their weight, then they should be walking more. It's that same sort of thing. So with meditating, sometimes I will meditate and my mind, it would be really tricky to shut off. And so I just got to be curious about that. Okay, why are these thoughts coming through? What are you trying to show me? What are you trying to tell me? How can I process you out? I have quite a few energy techniques. So once I've investigated and become curious, then I can shift them through those energy release techniques. Sometimes I can't, even though a lot of the times I can. And then other times I sit down to meditate and I'm instantly in bliss. Like I don't even feel my body. And I'm in this place of, I suppose, quiet, silence, nothingness. And it just brings me back into this really calm space where I have better collective thoughts, more control over my emotions, and I choose different behaviors because of that. And it helps me to become a different person. I probably started meditating. I keep saying 4 years. I think it'd be about 6 now. About 6 years ago, I started meditating, got really regular about 4 years ago, and I'm a different person than what I was back then, completely different. I think differently. I speak differently. I definitely have better control over my emotions. I make different decisions than I would have made back then. And I behave a lot differently as well. And it's not about being better or worse than myself or anyone else. It's just about evolving into the best version that I would like to be. And I don't believe we ever get, well, there's probably some gurus out there that get there, but maybe I'm wrong, and I'm open to being wrong if anyone wants to reach out and help educate me a little bit or show me some different ways of thinking. But I don't think we ever get to that ultimate space. Because for me, I believe life is a learning journey, and I believe that we're always improving. And so, yeah, and there is some contradiction there, I suppose, of people that are here to help others get there, probably get there a lot easier. But I don't know if I should rephrase it. I don't know if I will ever get to that ultimate place in this particular lifetime, because I feel like there's still so much that I have to learn as I'm going through that space. But that pretty much summarized my interview with Saurabh Jain. It was great having a chat with him. As I say always, definitely go ahead and have a look at the interview that we had together. All of his contact details are in the show notes of that interview, or you can reach out to me and I'm happy to connect you if you want to have a bit more of a chat with him. If you want to have a chat with me about, maybe doing some meditation or getting into a space where you're able to connect and reflect a lot more strongly, then definitely reach out. I always love connecting and chatting people, so I would love to hear from you. And if you've got any thoughts on some of the things that I said, and even if they contradict my thoughts, I love to be challenged and I love to become curious. So definitely put some comments in the chat, and I've been looking forward to reading them. So thank you very much for listening and tuning into this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. And guess what? Yes, I look forward to serving you again in our next episode. Thanks for joining in and listening to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. It's been great having you here. And if you'd like to go and like and subscribe and maybe even leave a 5-star rating if you think it's worth it, I'd really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.